Hello and welcome back to an episode of the CTO Show with Mehmet. Today, I am pleased joining me, Joshua Bernstein. He's the author of The Age of Synchrony. Also, Joshua has been an investor. He's been in the tech for a long time. And Joshua is kind of a rare mix, I would say, between the thought leadership with financial knowledge and, of course, a passion for startups. So I don't like to steal much from my guests' time, Joshua. This is why I would like to welcome you again. So, just for the audience, tell us more about you, your journey and what you're currently up to, and then we can start the discussion from there.
That sounds great, Mehmet. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here. I'm excited for this conversation that we're going to have today. By way of quick background, as you mentioned, I've been in the technology space for 30 something years with quite a diverse background, both on the investment, operational, as well as consulting sides of things. And where I've turned my attention to lately is an area that we call synchrony. So everyone has had the experience of feeling very deeply connected to someone very quickly. But that has largely been a random occurrence over time. And where I've been putting my focus lately is on the neuroscience, the science, and the technology of how we can choose to create those kinds of connections so that we can build more effective relationships, more effective teams, and more effective products. And if this is becoming more and more important these days as AI is on everyone's lips. So I spend most of my time nowadays building out these concepts, principles, frameworks, and trainings around synchrony. And I also run a consulting firm called Vault Profit Partners that works with companies across various different industries, anything from a founder with an idea on a napkin up through multi-billion-dollar companies. So I'm excited to dive into any and all of these topics with you, Mehmet, today, and anything that might be of interest to your audience.
Y- Great. Thank you again, Joshua, for making the time with me today. I would love to start with this shift towards the neuroscience and the synchrony. And I know like you talk about something called sync framework. So in simple terms, I would like you, Joshua, to dissect it to us. Why we need this framework, what's happening to our brains, I would say. So you felt like this is something much needed. Of course, you said AI, you just mentioned AI, but I'm sure like there are also like some other factors that play their role for you to dive more into this field. So tell us more about it.
Yeah. So first and foremost, there's an incredible feeling of disconnection globally nowadays. And that encompasses people feeling disconnected from one another, be they family members, friends, or the greater society at large. And also people feeling a fear of what's coming next as AI rolls out, right? There's this growing fear that AI is going to somehow replace lots of jobs and work, and what I'm finding is the more that people are starting to rely on AI, the more important the ability for human connection. So, what I see happening as we roll forward in time very quickly is the importance of human connection, of humanity, of being able to relate to one another, to lead teams, is going to exponentially grow as well alongside the technology. So, what led me to dive in deeper at this point in time was those societal trends, but also the technology to measure human interaction, to measure what we call synchrony. And just by way of quick definition, think of synchrony as when two biological systems start to act in time and in unison with one another. So that could be something from an amazing conversation where you just click, or something larger where whole teams feel like they're in momentum together. So, as the technology to measure that comes out of laboratories and starts to be available to us on a daily basis, you can think about the Apple watches that we wear, the rings that we have on, the headsets you see measuring brainwave activity. We have the ability for the first time to see real time human connection. And that opens up a tremendous opportunity for people. It opens up the opportunity to build very large companies that help to measure and enable these kinds of interactions. But it also helps us, all of us who are listening here, on a day to day basis to just improve the quality of our life. Because at the foundation of all human connection, we've found is this ability for us to have a neurobiological connection to other people. So, this isn't something that has to be learned. We all have this innate in us. It's maybe the original human technology. And as we're now able to start to work with it, it's going to open up a very exciting time. So I've put my stake in the ground. I'm just about to publish my first book on the topic, which is called The Age of Synchrony, and we can dive into that. But what I see unfolding is essentially a renaissance in human connection, of human interaction. And I'm excited to see where this leads and how we can build this together.
That's great. Now, maybe a controversial question, Joshua, because you know, you mentioned that we are more and more feeling not connected, and I hear it a lot. By the way, I had a lot of guests on this show who are in the space of some of them coaching, some of them leadership, and they were sharing with me how you know it's only the I'm not sure if it's only we can put this on the technology, or is it like our lifestyles which change with time, but we're seeing like this more I would say lack of bonding that used to happen before. And now in the age of AI, we are seeing a lot of these pushes where we're telling people, hey, like you can go and build great things by yourself, you don't need to build teams, you can be the one man show company, like billion-dollar single founders. So in all this, do you see like there is some also, in addition to the technology itself, us humans pushing toward this, maybe I would say directly or indirectly, maybe on purpose or not on purpose. And this is letting people more to feel like there's something wrong going on here. What's your take on that, Joshua?
Yes, I think we're seeing the evolution of a long downward trend in people bonding. So, if we think back long periods of time ago when people, let's say, lived in the place that they were born, were surrounded by close family and close friends, then people started moving into large cities, and that's increasingly become the phenomenon. So, what we're seeing is, again, a continuation of the separation of people. And you pointed out a very interesting, like this idea in technology of the one person billion-dollar company is now being romanticized. I'm not sure how romantic an idea that actually is, though. Do people really want to be sitting by themselves at a computer, necessarily with an army of bots, even though they might build a very large and successful company? Is that really how people want to be spending their time day to day? And I would argue that in most cases, no, because the need for human connection is vital. Right? It's vital to our health, to our well being, not just mentally, but physiologically. Like our bodies, when we get together, especially in person, though it can happen to some extent online, our bodies are craving that connection, right? And if we were able to see visually everything that was happening between people when we interact, we'd be blown away by it because our bodies are literally built for that kind of connection. So, what we're seeing is, again, a continuing movement towards more isolation and the rise of technology that gives the ability for people to work more independently with the technology. And a third aspect, which is our communication, as we're doing today with this podcast conversation, is largely being intermediated by screens. So, all of these different elements create this increasing separation. And in some way, I guess, like my work and where I'm staking this next phase of my career is on a push to help people move the other way. What I'm building is tools, understanding, and awareness for people to reconnect with one another, whether they're physically in person or online. Because I think if we don't reestablish that human connection to the extent it was previously, I think society might grow beautifully in a technological way and actually lose the core of what makes us human and what makes life enjoyable.
Right. Now, you talk about, using neuroscience, and you mentioned something about, the thing that we have but we might not know, that help us into, you know kind of communicating with others, and establishing trust, and maybe also emotionally affect people. And I'm asking you this because part of the journey of a lot of people, but here I focus more on entrepreneurs and founders. So they pass through a lot of uh, emotions, and a lot of moments where they need to establish this trust, whether it's like maybe they're pitching to a new customer, maybe they're pitching in front of an investor. So how I can know what I have when it comes to this. And of course, it's there. You said like I don't need to go and learn it, but how I can discover it myself and start to use it to strengthen this, trust, and the way I talk to people. Again, especially now, everything in front of us, it's like pushing towards like isolation, and staying behind the screen, as you said. And by the way, I'm happy because I'm still able to do the podcast. I tell people like the biggest gain for me, it's not like about how many downloads I get, it's not about if there's something in it for me. For me, it's just having a connection with a real human being, and having like 40-50 minutes of real chat about things that it's for interest for me, and of course might be interest for a lot of other people. So again, back to the question, Joshua, how I can discover this and grow it when it comes to the neuroscience uh, things that you mentioned at the beginning.
It's a great question. And what I would ask is, have you ever had that experience of just connecting very deeply and very quickly with someone, right?
Sometimes, yes.
Sometimes it happens, right?
Yeah.
And when it does, it's amazing. So the first piece of all of this I tell people is there's no need to add anything to what a person does, but we can remove maybe some of the things that get in the way, some of the noise. So the first thing I think people can do is just try to be more present when they're with someone, because our brains and bodies, and we now know this from the neuroscience literature, are always trying to create the connection with the other person. And where this shows up in some of the research, for example, is when we measure the brain activity. We can actually measure the brainwave activity and see when the brains connect up and get in sync and when they don't. And so, first thing, if a person learns just to become aware of those times where they feel that connection with someone, that's the starting place. Now, if we take it a little bit farther from that, uh, the question is, how do we use what our bodies are naturally picking up on to start to consciously create this feeling of connection, right? And that's where a lot of my work focuses on nowadays. And we can do that with the words that we use. So, for example, if you listen very carefully when a person is speaking, they will start to communicate using words based on what they see, hear, feel, or think. It's what I call the shift code. And what the person is doing is they are revealing to you how their brain likes to process information. So if you, again, listen carefully and pay attention to those words that a person is using, you can start to use similar types of words with that person to start to create a deeper bond that you and the other person will feel. There's also things that can be done in terms of just relaxation of your own body that enables the bodies to kind of commingle and create that kind of connection. And when you standardize this, which is where my work goes, I've built, as you mentioned, what I call the sync protocol, SYNC. And that's a simple 4-step process that people can use to change their state, S, to yield the information, meaning forget about what you're trying to accomplish, any agenda, just be with the other person. N is for notice how the other person is feeling, behaving, right? And C is to create the connection. So through very simple processes, again, awareness at first, and then simple processes to go ahead and create that connection, we can start to leverage this neuroscience that we currently are starting to understand better. So if we look, for example, at the research on a site that's called PubMed, right, of the National Institutes of Health, there are
Yeah.
about 16,000 cited research articles on this concept of synchrony nowadays. So the work that we have ahead of us is to make people aware first that this is even possible, right? Because you've said you've had those experiences where the connection just happens. We all have. It feels amazing. If we could do it on demand whenever we want, everyone wants to do that. And now we're in the process of putting those tools into people's hands so that people can choose to do that when they'd like to experience it. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, is there a way where I can encourage this? I don't know, like I can so maybe I'm a business owner, maybe I'm a small startup founder, or maybe I'm just a team leader. And I think this is again, maybe I'm repeating myself more than any time before. I see this is important, about the relationships and strengthening these relationships. How I can encourage this, Joshua? Is there any kind of practice that I can do with my team so we can be prepared? So whether we are going to meet a new customer, or maybe we are having a new business meeting with a potential partner, and or so of course, knowing this and being aware is one thing, but going and trying to practice it is something else. And I think, you know like any other thing in this world, like the more we try to practice it, the better we can do. So is there anything me as a team leader, founder, business owner, I can do, not only for myself but also for the people around me? And this, I think, you talk about it as the coherence also as well, and making everyone uh inside the organization be on the same page. So maybe I'm mixing two things together, but I think this is important. What's your take on this?
Yeah, so on a very, very simple level, we know that eye contact creates synchrony. So you're a
Mhm.
startup founder or a team leader, whatever it might be. If you just choose before a meeting or at the start of a meeting with someone, just to engage 5, 10 seconds of eye contact with that person, that will create synchrony. So there are very small practices. So one is again physiological. Eye contact is one way to do it. Another is the research shows that when teams get together and have a shared intention and they're clear about, let's say, the intention for the meeting, that can help to move people into coherence as well. So, very tactically speaking, having clear agendas and an outcome for a meeting stated on, and then at the beginning of the meeting to reiterate and discuss and make sure everyone, we use the term on the same page, is another way to do that. Those are, I would say, the two quickest ways to start to think about that. The other ways, as a startup leader or founder, how you can start to use or leverage this is to look at the communication patterns of another person. So we touched a little bit about words. So practically speaking, if you have some emails from somebody on your team or a client or a partner, if you simply look at those emails that they have sent and search for words related to what you see, hear, feel, or think, see which of those 4 categories they like to use the most. And the next time you communicate with them, choose some words in that category that they prefer. Another very tactical way. In terms of when you're meeting someone face to face, you can also start to pay attention to their body. So, how quickly do they speak? What's the tone of voice that they use? How often do they pause? How deeply are they breathing? So, as you start to get trained up in these concepts, you can very simply use these techniques that are available to all of us to create the synchrony and to start to do so on demand. As you start to get into, call I would say, more sophisticated or faster ways to do it, it turns out our brains have the ability to do it on their own. So you can literally start to train your brain to create the synchrony for you on demand whenever you would like. So think of these as a call it a system of training. Your body responds very quickly to effort. So if you start to, let's say, do this practice of creating eye contact with a person just for a few seconds at a time, and the research is very clear. They did a study with a group of high school students and their teacher. And they found that if they just start off with a very little bit of eye contact at the beginning of class, it creates a stronger synchrony. And the research shows that that led to much better outcomes in terms of the class, in terms of how people interacted, and those kinds of things. And if you do this consistently, you're telling your brain and your body that you are putting effort into this place and intention. And your brain and body will start to take that message in and then make it easier and easier for you.
One thing on this, Joshua, it's just came to my mind now. So some people would, would say, "Hey, like Joshua, I understand what you're saying. I got it, but I'm an introvert. Like I feel shy. I can't do eye contacts. All so, what's your counter argument to someone who might say this?"
Yeah, it's actually funny. Someone who feels that they're a little more introverted will actually pick up on this maybe more quickly. Here's why. A big piece of learning to get in sync with other people is observation. So if
Mhm.
someone tends to be more introverted, a lot of my friends who consider themselves more introverted are extremely observant because they might not be putting as much time into thinking, what am I going to say next to lead the conversation? But they tend to pay very close attention to the people in front of them and what they're doing. So, to an introvert person, I would say that's amazing. That's a superpower. Now, leverage that, start to pay a little more attention to what the communication from that other person is telling you, their words, their body language, their breath. So get even better at reading those kinds of signals. And then the next step is to think, what is going on in this person's mind right now? Like really try to put yourself into their shoes. And you'll find that the act of putting yourself into that person's shoes often creates the synchrony itself. So for an introvert, there's not this need to have to go out and create eye contact, to use that mechanism for it. They don't have to start to talk more or be more charismatic. They can actually leverage their own strengths and their own interests to go ahead and create the bond. And what happens, Mehmet, is once the bond is created, you typically feel that in your own body. It's a very strong signal that now that you're aware that this signal exists, I bet over the next few days you'll start to pay more attention to it and you'll notice when it shows up. And so for an introvert and for everyone else, once they start picking up on those signals, they can start to just kind of let conversations flow more naturally, right? You don't feel like you have to do anything or guide the conversation in a certain way because once you have the connection established, we interpret that as trust. And ultimately, a lot of your questions today so far have really been asking, how do we create trust with people? Right?
Right.
How do we create trust? And so once that connection is there and you know it's there, carry on as normal. You don't have to do anything special after that.
So you know, uh, it's very deep. It looks simple, but it's not simple. But at the same time, it's not hard. And the reason I'm saying this, Joshua, because I know from myself, um, I still consider myself sometimes an introvert, but I can relate to what you just said, right? Maybe you saw like my eyebrows went up when you were talking about this. And,
And Mehmet,
for,
yes, I'm paying attention to that.
yeah. And the, um, the way, maybe it's the same thing, but in a different technique, usually is if I have to be kind of leading a conversation somehow. So the best way I found would work and to build trust, of course, like the eye contact as much as you can, and then try to focus on what you are trying to convey as message more than what people will think about me, or maybe like they will not like my voice tone, or maybe they will find me silly, like, and this is why I was, smiling when you were mentioning this, because I could relate to this earlier in my career. When I had the first time to go and start to talk to people. I was like sitting behind a screen all day, and all of a sudden I found myself like, hey, I have to talk to a lot of people, and this is the thing which I think the question I wasn't asking myself that time, but now I know what was the question was how I can let other people trust me. Like, and why should they trust me in the first place, right? So I think the word trust is very important here. And that's why, I was asking you specifically about founders and small teams, because always they think, okay, how we can do this big impression. But I see like if they go back to basics and just try to be themselves and try to do these things we were just mentioning, I think this is sort out a lot of the things. So 100% agree on you on this, Joshua. Now I want to ask you about the book. So what's the core idea, or like the big idea behind the book? What you're trying to tell the audience?
So yeah, in the book is called the Age of Synchrony. And the core premise of the book is that we have entered a new age. In that age is when getting in sync moves from chance to choice, meaning we now have the technology to measure it. We're building out the capabilities to train it and learn it. And as people become aware that this exists, it has the potential to change so many domains of life, not only the business realm, as we're talking about, but healthcare, education, sports, technology. The reason is we are racing to use AI, and it's transforming so many different aspects of our lives. But if we race to implement AI and new technologies, that amplifies what we do. And if we don't have deep human connection and coordination established, and we race to amplify that, that leads to chaos. So, the core purpose and premise of the book is really to make people aware that this concept of synchrony exists, that it's something we can work with, and it will become the most important human capability in the time moving forward from here. And lastly, there's nothing to learn. Our body comes pre installed, all of us, with the biological technology to know when we're in sync, to know when we're out of it, and to create it. So, by publishing the book and by doing so now, I want to start a conversation around this so people know that there's an ability that's in them already that can really transform each aspect of their life in a very positive manner. So that's the primary, say, purpose and goal of the book right now. But to take it back to your last comment, which was so interesting, you said, earlier in your career, or maybe some founders get in a room and they're like, how do I create trust? Right. So I can get people on board and get them to trust me.
Yeah.
And what's so interesting is that, let's take the example of a founder going in to pitch some investors, right? Decisions are made emotionally, and then we use logic to justify them, right? So, what you've hit on is the most important thing in that room. When a founder walks into that room or anyone into a meeting, the most important thing is what is the state that the person's in and how is the emotional connection between the people, because those two things create the trust. The trust isn't from something you say. The trust is from being who you really are, which you hit upon, right? In letting that authentic you come through in the right way. That's the foundation that has to exist for a yes from an investor, for a meeting to go well, for a relationship, be it personal or professional, to progress. And so by putting this book out at this point in time, ultimately, I want people to realize that they don't have to go off and try to be someone they're not. They don't have to go off and try to, use certain tactics to create this trust. What they really have to do is learn how to let their brain and body do what they were designed to do.
So it's like we call it reading the room, right? So when you walk in, so you read the room, you see, like, and understand. Of course, I suspect, and this we do in every meeting, whether it's like for talking to investors or talking to customers, that you did your own research. But again, when you walk in, because this is a mistake I heard about, I didn't see it. I saw it in not for investment purposes, but where people they do research well, but they become so, I don't want to be that harsh, but I would use this word. So they become so robotic, right? So they program their brain with the information that they have found, or maybe what people they told them about this person that they're going to meet, or maybe more than one person they're going to meet. And then they start to program themselves. Oh, like this is how we should act, like this is how we should enter the room, this is how we will greet them, this is how we will talk. And I can say 90% of the time, will be more, I will not be exaggerating, that people who overcomplicate things fail, and people who just go with the flow, of course, like without losing respect, without being so ignorant. So go there, of course, do your research, but as you said, like just be yourself. I found out that at least you would not go with disappointment, even if the outcome wasn't as you wanted. But probably like you might say, hey, like maybe we can talk another time, or let me leave this with you, and then maybe we'll follow up in couple of weeks, couple of months maybe, and then we will review it again. And yeah, this completely makes sense. And what I'm understanding from you, Joshua, is actually very simple, yet people they try to overcomplicate things. And you mentioned something about like how we take decision emotionally, and I think a lot of people miss on this, and this is why they overcomplicate, um you know communications sometime, which is, and I'm bringing this all to my question, which I would ask you next about AI again. So nowadays we're seeing, like, as we are more and more adopting AI, and of course I'm mentioning AI, it's not because there's no other technology, because it's the main technology that is now going mainstream. But I'm seeing more and more people are relying on it to reach out to other people, like to put it as a digital twin persona. So here, what what would be the method to keep having this sense of trust? So let's say, of course, I don't wish any day that happens soon, but someone asked me one day, like, what if you, as Mehmet, as the host, you put a digital twin, and and this digital twin start to interview people? I said never ever. I would stop the podcast the moment, like, because I want me to have this conversation. But still, it's something that's coming, Joshua. I don't know how you're seeing this. Is it a threat? Is it like something we should be aware of? What are your thoughts on this?
It's such an interesting issue, right? Because let's say if you're doing email outreach at scale, right? The lure of using AI to craft more personalized messages, eh, who's going to turn that down, right?
Yeah.
Because the promise, right, of reach and personalization, and so of course that's going to be adopted. Does it lose something? Absolutely. And maybe not exactly in the way most people may think, but the process of actually thinking about the person that you're emailing and the intention that goes into that, while we can't measure that directly today, has an impact on the other person who receives it, right? And I'm not going to dive into kind of esoteric topics, but there's a lot of research going on nowadays about the physics, right, of non-local communication, for example. And so this idea that we can use AI to be everywhere, to do things at mass volumes, to create a digital twin, it can do wonders for blasting out content, but it doesn't create real connection with people. And to your point, too, the day they come to you and say, Mehmet, here's your digital twin who's going to do the podcast, right? That you're going to run the other way. Uh, I completely get that. So, what we're seeing is a divergence, right? We're going to see mass usage and adoption of AI tools for massive communications, for digital twins. It's unavoidable at this point. But we're then, in a parallel sense, going to see tremendous focus on real time human connection and communication. And the more people rely on the scalable technology, the more important and the faster the need will grow for the human side of the equation. So I see these really as complementary, sides, if you want to call it two sides of the same coin. And so what we'll see is the technological use takes off. Again, that loses some of the ability to really connect connection. And then on the other side, we're going to see a really big drive towards offline in-person events, like knowing that you're actually sitting in front of a real person and having a real communication. And the core of that comes down to one thing, and that is AI can simulate human connection, but it does not have an embodied sense of it, right? So
Right.
it can mirror the words that someone uses, it can say the right things, it can appear to be empathetic, but our nervous systems are actually communicating with one another. So, right now, even though you and I are seeing each other through a screen, our nervous systems are interacting with one another.
Right.
And that doesn't happen in technology. And so oftentimes I think what people find, and this is increasing, is they might have a communication. Maybe they're even using their LLM and they like the response they're getting, but it feels hollow. And that's because the body is feeling a lack of another nervous system to connect with. So I think you're touching on what may be the core issue moving forward. And it will be very interesting to see how these two things evolve together. And again, back to your question earlier, that is also one of the primary reasons why I thought now was the right time to write this book, because I feel that the technological side of the equation is being focused on, it's being taught, it's being emphasized, and the human side is something that we're losing. I look at a lot of kids, I don't know if you have children, but I look at a lot of younger kids, teenagers, 20 somethings nowadays, and the ability to just hold a human conversation is declining tremendously, right? And that shouldn't be considered an art or a lost art. That's just the basics of how people have engaged since the beginnings of time. So back to the beginning of this question here is something lost, right, by those uses of technologies? Absolutely. But we're not putting that genie back in the bottle. So we're going to walk down these two paths and hopefully find a way to make them, work together.
If you allow me, Joshua, to the point you said, this is my own theory. If everyone, and like these tools are becoming, available to us like any other tool, right? Like, so maybe like any new thing in this world, at the beginning it will be like just in the hands of few people, but after a while it becomes mainstream. So these AI tools are in the hand of everyone. My theory is that means everyone can do these personalized emails, right? And the promise that, oh, you use the technology, whether it's AI or anything else, like before, like they were using some other technologies to do the personalization, and now AI is making it much easier. So my theory says, if everyone is able to do the same thing, what's your differentiation? In startups we use the word mod, right?
Yeah.
And that's why I'm believing. And again, in startups we talk about distribution, and distribution is like how you're gonna sell your product, service, like, right? And this is where I believe more than any time before, it's like the humanization of this relationship is the one that gonna win on the long run. And I'm not against using technology. I use AI not because I'm a technologist by training, but because I can see the benefits of using this technology. I can see the benefit of using maybe some AI agents to summarize my emails, maybe sometime if it's simple things to reply to these emails. But it's not a replacement to me as Mehmet, the human being, talking to Joshua, the human being. And because we don't have to only talk about this, my opinion, of course, like we don't have to only, of course, maybe we have a business transaction, but to me it's like about these long lasting relationships. And maybe I can discuss with Joshua something related to philosophy, or maybe I would discuss with you something related to, I don't know, history. And because you know what I have found out, and because I work in sales for long time, you build the trust by discussing something outside of your main reason why you are there. And this is where you build this, what we were calling the trust, the bond, whatever you want to call it. So to your point, Joshua, I think this is a very interesting times. The only concern I'm having, I'm happy, for example, some some kids, actually, my daughter included, she's aware that there should be a limit of how to utilize AI and not to 100% outsource your everything to AI and still keeping some human things. Of course, like, but like similar to when the social media came and similar to when the internet before came and all this, there are some hype about the technology, but AI is very different place. It's like, I don't know. We will see how things would be in the future. But I'm very happy, Joshua, that you brought these things, and maybe the audience will notice in the last 2 3 episodes, I started to focus more on the human aspect of the technology because I think we are not discussing this enough. Um, it's just an observation from my side. Yeah, I'm excited about the technology. I share a lot on my socials about, hey, like, see this model, see this, discovery. But we need to remember we are humans. Last question I want to ask you, Joshua, for today is, with all this happening and back to the neuroscience and back to all the points we went through today, and it's kind of a philosophical question. Of course, if you want to take a different direction, completely fine. What would be our purpose? Like, what would be our activities in an age where AI can maybe do, I would say, 95% of our work?
That's a fascinating topic that we'll need to dive deeper into. But just to touch on one other thing first, and that is, you mentioned with your daughter and with kids and the kind of the growth of AI, like almost like what's left, like what do we do, right? Where do we go? I really think the only differentiation moving forward as things become more commoditized is authenticity. And that ties into this last question is what's the purpose? What do we do? I would say the purpose really is to discover who you are and to be that to the fullest extent. Um, that really, if you imagine a future in which the AI or AI and robots, those related fields, can do most of what we would consider to be the productive work. Um, I don't have an easy answer, right, for what people do in those scenarios
Sure.
because we derive a lot of our meaning to life by the productivity that we have. But just thinking more broadly about kind of purpose and why we're here, uh, I think a big part of our purpose here is just to experience life to the fullest we can and then to share those experiences with other people, either to maybe give people a spark of imagination that they might want to try it too, or to just share experience to grow the richness of the fabric of humanity together in the experiences that we have. So maybe that pulls this conversation maybe back to a very interesting place, which is go have the experiences in real life, live the richest, fullest life you can have, surrounded by great family and friends and food and drink, and maybe then use the technology, leverage, and scalability to let as many people as possible partake in that to the extent that they want to.
This is the best advice I would say. Yeah, like you go and enjoy the life, just discover and share the experiences. Like this is what I'm optimistic by nature, and this is why I'm telling people, yeah, like if the technology can do all this, yeah, maybe we should go back and we should like go travel the world and start to discover ourselves, discover other cultures. There's plenty of things to do over there. Well, Joshua, really, I enjoyed the discussion. We can go hours and hours, I would say, especially on this last topic. But before I let you go, where people can find out more and get in touch?
Absolutely. The best place, and this will be starting in a few, by the time this episode is out, it'll be available, is to go to Amazon, get a copy of The Age of Synchrony. I think for people who want to dive deep into this topic, that's the best place to go find it. I'm on Twitter. We'll put in the show notes at Joshua Bernstein. And I'll give you all the contact information. Mehmet, I welcome anyone who's interested in these topics. We'll give them my email address. Just reach out. Would love to have conversations with anyone that has any interest in these or related topics. And to echo your sentiment as well, Mehmet, is I love technology. I'm fascinated by all of these developments. And I want to make sure that we have this human capability, you know, side by side going forward. So to your extent, so people can live their lives, explore the world, enjoy time with family and friends, and add to the richness of all of these conversations.
Great. Thank you again, Joshua, for being here with me today. Like, of course, the links will be in the show notes as you mentioned. So if people are listening to us on your favorite podcasting app, you will find that in the show notes. If you're watching this on YouTube, you'll find it in the description. Again, I can't thank you enough, Joshua. It was a very rich conversation, deep conversation. That's why I like about meeting people like yourself, to discuss these, I would say, important topics, which in my opinion, we are not covering them enough. So I'm hoping that it's small contribution to the world where I bring people like yourself, Joshua, to share that. And thank you for sharing the time and the knowledge with me and the audience today. And this is how I end my episode. This is for the audience. If you just discovered us by luck, thank you for passing by. I hope you enjoyed. If you did so, give me a favor, subscribe and share with your friends and colleagues. And if you are one of the loyal fans, thank you very much for listening, tuning in, sending messages. I really appreciate that. And thank you, of course, to keep the podcast running now and having the amazing results I'm seeing. Different countries. Sometimes we are in Europe, sometimes in Australia, Asia, where we are trending in the top 200 Apple Podcast charts. So this cannot happen without you folks. So thank you very much. And as I say always, stay tuned for a new episode very soon. Thank you. Bye bye.
Hit that subscribe button. Share the show with your tech-savvy friends and fellow entrepreneurs, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. Your support means the world to us.